how many of you know what a longitudinal structural equation model is? Yeah, that's very encouraging. How many of you ran it before? Yeah, that's okay. How many of you feel very comfortable with this idea? One person. Longitudinal structural equation models. Okay, good. Well, that's good. What about multi-level models? Who knows what multi-level models are? Good. This is I like to see this. How many of you are like really feel comfortable with them? Okay, good. Because sort of the session's been designed in a way that I'm kind of assuming that you know what these things are, or at least half of these, and then you can pay attention in that half and not pay attention in the other half. Or I guess you're more than welcome to pay attention to the whole thing. That would make me happy. But okay, so when I was putting this slideshow together, I have to say I didn't know what to write down because there isn't much research on this. It's very close to none, the research on these ideas. Some of the things we talked about on Tuesday translate very easily, and some of the things don't translate at all. And there's some new problems, new issues that come up. And I started writing those down, and I just ran out of issues to write down. Well, we can discuss those issues one by one in detail, and that'll take a long time. Though I don't know if I can have any definite answers for you. So all these things are still very new. Most of the time they don't work, unfortunately. So I'm going to try to show you how it works on the course when we go over to the computer lab, but that's not a given. And there's still a lot of research going on in this area, so we can expect more results in the future. But okay, I'm going to shut up and get to it now. So we're talking about multi-level and longitudinal models. I'm going to start with longitudinal structural equation models or latent growth models. Though I guess it's not limited to latent growth models, it's just one of the more common models ran in this framework. That model is a structural equation model. It's that simple. I already talked about how to deal with missing data and auxiliary variables, etc. in structural equation models. This is no different. There's some new issues that come up, and I'm going to go through those one by one, hopefully all of them. And these are usually model size and model identification issues. And to solve these problems, traditionally, we use direct estimation that corrects for missing data. So full information maximum likelihood. I'm not saying you cannot impute, you can, it's possible. I've seen it done. But usually the direct estimation approaches are used. Now in multi-level models, there's actually a lot more issues that come up, a lot more problems. And usually it starts with patterns. Patterns of missing data gets really, really complex when you extend into the multi-level framework and you have three-dimensional data sets. That gets really complex. Level problems, which level you have your missing data on. That's always an issue. And what to model, what not to model as missing data. And traditionally, these approaches using imputation, though, I have had success with direct estimation. I've seen it done, and it actually works in some cases. And I'm going to show you one of those cases in the computer lab later on. It was one of Julia McClellan's data sets. Who's not here? She's not here. Wow. Okay. Well, hopefully she'll show up sooner or later, and I need her help. So, okay, so I'm just going to start with missing data and longitudinal structural equation models. So basically, as I said, a lot of the same approaches work. So full information maximum likelihood, direct estimation, that usually works. And an imputation can also work. You can impute using an unstructured model. Just like when you have a long data set, it's a long longitudinal data set, you can actually impute that using an unstructured model. And in AMOS, you can actually impute using the exact model you're running. So you can impute based on the exact model, and that gives you a little bit of efficiency, though not much, so it doesn't really matter. Though, as I said, said, direct estimation is probably the better way to go. If you have a chance to do direct estimation in any situation, that's probably the better way to go. It's more efficient, and it's less of a pain in the ass, honestly. Okay, so I just put up a very simple growth curve model, and this is from the M+ manual. It's structured as a structural equation model. All the observed variables are dependent variables in this model, so that is not a problem. You cannot have, when you're direct estimating, you cannot have missing data on the independent variable. That's one of the things that we talk about. Now over here, that's not an issue. Now if you have covariates, that becomes an issue. Do the same tricks work? Auxiliary variables, you can include them just like you would otherwise. So, as you would with any other structural equation model, you can take auxiliary variables and include them. Okay. Okay, so you can include them the way you would include them otherwise. Though, there are some practical problems. Let's say you have a 6-rate data set, or let's say a 20-rate data set like I had once. But let's say you have a 6-rate data set. When you're including these auxiliary variables, and they are time varying also, then you have to get 6 auxiliary variables. So that's a lot. I usually think that in a regular model, you have 6 auxiliary variables, and that's a lot. Now, let's say you have 4 time varying covariates, well, it multiplies like crazy. Then you have 24 auxiliary variables, and your model size gets out of hand. Now, there are some rules that you can look up in the literature, and I don't know off the top of my head how big can your structural equation model be, but it really gets out of hand. Now, the good news is that if you have time varying auxiliary variables, you do not have to take into account that it's time varying. Just throw them in as any other variables, as auxiliary variables, and they'll work. Okay. Now, when you're imputing, then your biggest problem is probably going to be convergence. I have tried imputing with these models, and the imputation models just don't converge. It's like they just don't work. I mean, it's worth trying, but most of the time we're going to have convergence problems. Now, that is probably because when you have longitudinal data, you're going to have a very high correlation between the back-to-back observations, at least in some data sets. I use economic data. Well, guess what? Last year's GDP correlates almost perfectly with this year's GDP. It's almost a 1. Now, when you have 1s in your covariance matrix in the structural equation model, you do not have a unique piece of information. When you have a lot of 1s in there, you just lost all those degrees of freedom. It's like not there. So you're losing degrees of freedom empirically, I mean, you're effectively using degrees of freedom. Your models will not run if you're trying to estimate more things than information you have. And those are not considered unique pieces of information. Now, one of the things you can do is you can collapse your data. But you have to think about it very hard if that's a good idea. Let's say you take your time varying covariate, you average it, then you have an average kind of result for that auxiliary variable. And if the average is good enough to predict the missingness, then you're fine. But oftentimes, that is not the case. Oftentimes, let's say, I don't have data for a while, and then I start having data and it shows an increase. Now, I usually don't have data because below a certain threshold, I couldn't measure it. Now, let's say I have covariates that would actually account for that those values are actually low, that the missingness are actually due to low values on something. I can have covariates, but if I average those covariates, I lose that information. So you can use them as auxiliary. So you really have to think very hard on if it's a good idea to collapse those time varying covariates to simplify your model. Okay, now, any questions? You want to talk about this? Have you had situations? Can you think of anything? Because really, I mean, these are difficult issues the ones we're getting into. And I'm just giving you my own personal experience. There's absolutely no literature on this that I've found. So if you want to talk about this, we can. So I don't want to just be up here and talk and lecture. So if anything comes to your mind, please jump on in. So Anything you want to throw out there? You didn't miss anything. I'm still talking about structure-based models. Good. Okay. So anything? Good. You want? Okay. So interrupt me. Feel free. Now we talked about plan missing design on Tuesday a little bit. You can have plan missing designs that actually work really well with longitudinal data. Let's say you collect only 2 years of information on the same person. So you collect data from them twice, 2 separate years, and then the following year you collect data again, for 2 years. So you don't have to go back to the same people over and over again. Now, why would you do this? Well, first, it's cheaper. You don't have to track people where they are. It's much easier to track them in back-to-back years than not. Second, you're minimizing your panel effects. Like once somebody gets the same set of questions, let's say back-to-back, in 5 years, they'll remember. Maybe they won't, but you can actually minimize your panel effect like this. So you can have this kind of a design, which is a plan missing design, and as long as you randomly select who's in which cohort, then you're fine. You're actually missing a completely random data, and you can analyze it. Like if you want to analyze the change in this variable, that's very simple. Just go back to that model I had up earlier and run it. It's that simple. And assuming it converges, and it usually would in this situation, then you'll be fine. You get unbiased estimates. Now you can actually get creative and collapse the number of cohorts down even more. This even minimizes panel effects further because you increase the amount of time in between questionnaires. So, and you only have to have 3 cohorts now. Now you can increase the size of each cohort. The problem is you're not going to have any back-to-back data for 3 years to even look at. Over here, after the first 2 years, you have something to look at. I don't know if that's a goal or you actually want to wait out 5 years before you analyze your data. Over here, that you increase that time. So, okay. Now, when you're going to do this kind of design, or you want to do something like this, always do a power analysis. Because you want to know how much power you're losing by doing this design versus collecting the data on everybody, and adjust your sample size accordingly. Because if your sample size is not big enough, you're not going to have the results, obviously. So, also, once you get a little too crazy with these patterns, and you can get very creative with these, you want to look at if it actually going to run. And that's one of the other reasons to run a simulation and take power analysis, check convergence. Any questions? You're way too quiet. Okay, we're going to be done in 45 minutes if you're not going to talk. So I'm serious. I'm that serious. I have 21 or 2 slides, and I'm already through, a quarter of it. So
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so can you come back?
Yes. That's easy.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're saying you would estimate these using full information maximum likelihood?
Yes.
And say that 1995 cohort 2 is missing data?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you need auxiliary
This is
variables?
all missing data. You don't need any auxiliary variables to predict the missing ones because it's missing completely at random.
If your cohorts were ages, that
If your cohorts were ages, well, let's think about this. Like, what do you mean?
they just enter different ages. And so,
Well, that depends on your research question. What are you interested in? Are you interested in people at different ages or people at different years? People at different ages. Okay? Yeah, you can do this. But you might want to correct for year. You might want to have a variable in there that corrects for what's going on in a certain year. And even then you're making an assumption that, let's say the times, quote unquote, the times have the same impact on children of every age. So let's say you're measuring something psychological, 9/11 happened, and everything changes. think about things differently, even children. So that should be corrected for in some way, shape, or form. So yes, you can do this kind of design, but you need to correct for certain things. And that's a big research question. What are all the things you need to correct for, and how you can correct for those?
Can you also explain, so this is a latent growth trajectory, right?
Yeah, it could be.
You only have some time points for every observation?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So you're not really creating a trajectory from 95 to 99, are you? Or are you just doing it like you're
Yes. No, you're doing a trajectory from 95 to 99,
You are.
and you're treating the rest as missing data.
And so you're basing the first 2 years of this trajectory on cohort 1 and the second one?
Yes, pretty much. But it can be done.
Yeah.
But you lose a lot of power if you're not able to predict the missing.
Well, you don't have to predict the missingness because it's missing completely at random.
That's right.
I mean, assuming that your sampling is not there. I mean, if it's not, then you do have to predict the missingness. You need to use auxiliary variables to predict the missingness. But if you just have, let's say, a group of people, so you want to look at people's attitudes towards, I don't know, toothpaste every year for 5 years, and you have a big population, you draw a random sample for each year, for each cohort, then you're fine. Your data is missing completely at random. Now, if you're getting into the school context of which students enter each year, and then can get messy, then you might not be able to send missing completely at random.
So with this, you're sort of assuming that you change, you could take 2-point change and turn it into a 5-point change because of the random sample.
Yeah.
So you're almost predicting that the people you looked at in 95 and 96 will look a lot like the people in 97 and 98 once they get there?
Yeah, I mean, they should look exactly the same if they're sampled randomly. I mean, you know, within the rules of sampling.
Did you, go ahead.
What if the effect of your time varying varies over time? I guess that'll come up too, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a covariate and that varies over time, then
It should be stronger in the younger cohort than the older.
well, we're not talking about age here.
Um,
I just randomly sampled your Facebook.
So basically, I think where there could be some confusion is when you're saying cohort, you're defining cohort 1 are the people you randomly sampled in 95 and 96.
Yeah, that's.
You don't mean like a cohort of 5th graders.
No, it's not a cohort of fifth grade. No, it's not.
So you could also just say group 1, group 2, group 3.
Yeah, group
So it's
one,
not
group
like
two.
cohort.
Yeah, so it's not like it's
Like
not.
some people think of cohort.
It's not necessarily in the school context.
Right,
It's still a cohort though, in the literature.
right. It's just it's not a panel study.
It is a panel study.
But like cohort 1 would have kids from every grade. Wouldn't it?
We're sampling people who use toothpaste.
Okay.
Right.
So,
Or if it
Yeah,
was like
okay,
a grade,
so
it would be
random
kids, it would be a
sample.
random sample of your whole population.
Right.
And so you could have cohorts within there, I guess.
So cohort 1, 2, and 3 are exact same and different randoms.
it is going to overlap.
Mhm.
And if they don't, then you get into the trouble that you asked about. And you have to control for a lot of things, like what's going on in the world and et cetera, et cetera.
Did you already talk about missing design with items, or did you?
No.
Just people?
No, just people. Items. That's, what is an item? Anymore?
Well, I've actually I've just been doing an email exchange about this morning. And this is the right time to talk about it. I honestly don't know what we're going to do. We did do we ask people the same questions we asked them before? Or do we do a new series of randomization, so for every scale they come to?
I would say do a new series of randomizations.
But what
But
makes
that's
me,
just gut instinct.
right, but what makes me uncomfortable is what if one item turns out to be really interesting, but because of the randomization, not enough people were asked that same item twice. And we don't really get an imputed value for that, we just get the information, you know what I mean? And so,
Yes. Yes, I know what you mean.
like, I want to do a crosstab,
No. That doesn't work anymore.
so that's when my instinct is that we can cut down enough of this, my hope is that we can cut down enough of the second wave, because we don't have all the history in it, that we can ask everything of everybody and see if that makes a difference. We have to end this in wave one, but not have any.
I mean, if you can't ask everything from everybody, and you don't have any concerns of survey fatigue and also they figure it out, et cetera, then it's the best design. The best way to deal with missing data is not to have any. That's how I started on Tuesday.
But it's a tricky question if you should re-randomize or if you can ask the same
I
set.
think it should be randomized. And you should be, I mean, if you want to do crosstabs, don't do plan missing design. I mean, it's not really designed for that kind of analysis.
Well, it's going to be publicly released, so it's, you have to think of, you know what I mean? It's going to be a
Yeah.
national data set, so you have to think of a lot of contingencies. Hello?
Yeah. Well, yeah. The problem is when you're doing a plan missing design for any study, you really have to do it for your own purposes. I mean, the plan missing design works for some things and doesn't work for others. If you want to create a data set that works for everything, don't do a plan missing design. So,
But then you get the psychologists who say you didn't ask every item on the 20-item scale.
yeah, because it's missing completely
You
at
keep you on the phone
random.
for 3 hours.
It's missing completely at random, and that is just fine. I'm going to use an IRT model or a confirmatory vector model to correct for that. So,
Yeah.
but that goes back to the cross-sectional stuff. So, the same thing. This is just an extension. Anything else?
I was wondering if that top one for item would be a good way of looking at developmental change analysis or not.
It could be. I mean, it would have to be a good design. And the first question you want to ask yourself is, why not collect complete data? That usually has an easy answer, cost too much. Or you don't have enough time to do it. I mean, I've seen people collect data on let's say, 5th graders, and then 5th and 6th graders, back years, like panel, and then do it on 6th and 7th graders, and then 7th and 8th graders, and et cetera, and then treat it as like a big data set, like developmental change data set. Well, yes, but that's not taking into account things that happen in the world. You're kind of ignoring the whole world around you, and you're doing that. All you're doing is taking people of certain ages. You're assuming that they develop the same. And that might be a reasonable assumption in some cases. That might not be a reasonable assumption in others. So, I mean, what it comes down to is what you can sell to your reviewer. I'd be very concerned if I saw a paper that looks at 5-year developmental change and collect the data in 2 years and use this plan missing design. I'd be very concerned that, I guess, that works in a vacuum, but the world is not a vacuum. So you'd have to work very hard to convince me. Go ahead.
Do you have the correct or account for dependency and independency? Because, for example, cohort 1 is a compact shot, and 95, 96 is dependent. Basically, these are the same people. And if you look at cohort 1 and cohort 2, 95, 96, the measures of the people are different.
Well, you collect data on the same people over here and over here, but these are different people. You collect data on different people in these two subsamples. And in fact, if you want to be really careful, what you can do is draw out these two ways. to correct for, you don't have to correct for dependence in these two. I mean, it depends on what model you run. If you go back and run, I'm going the wrong way. If you go back and run this model, dependence is corrected for in the growth curve, the intercept. So that's already corrected for. And if you're doing some other model like Ranger causality, cross-lag model, or something like that, you do have to correct for dependence between years. Okay. So, plan missing, it gets hairy and difficult. Okay, attrition. Now, this is one of the most difficult situations. If you can assume that attrition is missing at random, your people are dropping out and you're capturing all the information that predicts dropout, so it predicts the missingness pattern, then you're fine. One of the prescriptions that I kind of threw out on Thursday, and apparently it's already been used in the study since Thursday, was that asking, how likely are you to come back next year for the continuation of this study? I mean, that's a good way of making sure that you have more data. It's a good design approach. But if you do not have more data, you have NMAR, then you're not fine. You're in trouble because you're going to have bias if you're trying to analyze it with more methods. And unfortunately, the solutions are just really not there. We talked about the Echo model that simultaneously simulates or models missingness and your regression model on Thursday, and it usually doesn't work, or I guess it does work in this simple context. Now you can extend that to the multi-level context. What you can do is you can simultaneously model survival model, which is basically, geez, these people are going to drop out. That's what it models. You can separately model your, let's say, your growth model, or latent growth model. If you do those simultaneously and you let the residuals correlate, then you can have NMAR data. And this is actually, I actually found this from one of our students. Moyen asked from SRAM, asked this on the M+ mailing form. And I was like, well, actually that's brilliant. Like, that does model this. And then Esperov, who is the genius from, at least that's what I heard from everybody, pretty much responded, yeah, that's the way to model attrition. The problem is this usually doesn't run. It doesn't converge because the surface of the likelihood is flat and it's kind of hard to climb up on. So you probably want to use some kind of other estimator than maximum likelihood, use some quasi-likelihood estimators. And that takes a lot of programming, and that gets way beyond my head also. So, but it can be done. There are some, these ideas are kind of new out there, but it can be done, it can be modeled. I've never tried this, by the way. Hopefully I never will. It sounds ugly. Okay. So I think that's all I had on structural equation models. The structural equation models are the easier one of the two because I already talked about how to deal with missing data on structural equation models on Tuesday. So it's really not a problem. I mean, those things extend. There are some new issues that I wanted to talk about, but that's pretty much all I had on structural equation models, longitudinal structural equation models. So I'm getting into multi-level models. Got any questions about SEMs for everyone? Okay. So the first problem with a multi-level model is your data set looks like this. This thing was invented by somebody in my country. We're kind of proud of it. So far we talked about item missing data and unit missing data. Which, you know, in a two-dimensional is kind of easy. But think about a three-dimensional context. You can have So that would be considered an item missing data. But then you can have all sorts of missing. You can have this whole slice missing, or you can have this whole slice missing, or you can have this whole slice missing. So it can get ugly. So missing that. There's absolutely no literature on this as far as I know. I was the first one to write about these problems in my dissertation. I did not find anything. These don't even have a name of what they're called. Like unit missing, item missing. They have no names. But just to give you the examples I dealt with, I had data, overtime data on 186 countries for 21 years each country, and I had all sorts of missing data. I had item missing for Hungary. I didn't have trade volume for 1991. It was just not in the data set. I have no idea why. There's absolutely no reason that would have happened. So I didn't have that. Then I had, let's say, a variable missing for a whole country. One of my variables of interest in this analysis was corruption, and I only had corruption for 143 countries. It was all missing for the rest. So I had whole countries missing a certain variable. Then I had some countries completely missing. They were just excluded from my analysis completely, and unfortunately I didn't have too many of these because that was one of my claims that this analysis includes everybody. But it didn't, because it didn't include Afghanistan, it didn't include Cuba, it didn't include North Korea, and it didn't include a couple of the countries that I'm not even sure the countries, the Vatican, et cetera, et cetera. Depending on which organization you talk to, they might be considered countries or they might not be considered Liechtenstein. So those were missing. Then I didn't have data on energy consumption for the year of 2004 on anybody. That data was just not there in the data set yet. So that's a whole new missing. And let's say I didn't have data on West Germany after 1989. And I'm not even sure that should have been treated as missing data, because that country didn't even exist afterwards. So I had those types of missing data. I had almost all data missing for the Yugoslav wars of those countries. The Yugoslav countries, they were just not reporting to anybody during that time. So I have all sorts of interesting missing data problems, and there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the literature on how to deal with most of these. Okay, so let's start with the easy stuff. If you have missing data in a multi-level model on the dependent variable, and you can assume that it's missing at random using all the other analysis variables, then you're fine. You don't need to do anything. You just need to plug it into your software and run it. That's the best situation to have. Now sometimes you're gonna be missing whole waves for certain people. If you're missing whole waves, and you can assume that that data is also missing at random, then once again, you're fine. You don't have to do anything. And just give you an example. If you have a dependent and an independent variable, and you have, let's say you have the scatter over here, you fit a line through it, and this is just within one of your clusters. Let's say you randomly delete a couple of these, the line should be the same. That is why you're fine, if you have a couple waves missing. Now, most of the time, I see situations where I have a couple items missing for certain waves, but I have some information I can incorporate, and that I want to incorporate, because it could inform the missingness, and I don't like throwing away data. That's sort of, I have that principle. If I have data, I don't want to throw it away. I want to use it. Then you get into a situation where you don't want to drop, let's say this is over time, you don't want to drop those people because you have some information on them. You don't have all of it, but your missing data software will completely exclude them for that wave where you have missing data on, unless you do something. So that's why you want to come up with better ways of dealing with this. Okay. Questions? Okay.
This one.
Good.
Suppose we try to figure out, this is,
Oh, well, yeah, so you're basically saying if I run this in SAS, and let's say I have growth curve models for request food, and I have 4 waves of data, and this one person doesn't have request food for wave 2, but I have all my other variables.
Yeah, is that your dependent variable?
Request food, yeah.
Yeah, you're fine. You're absolutely fine.
But does it drop everything from wave 2, or does
No.
it just drop that
No.
one data point?
No, if your dependent variable is missing, it won't drop everything.
Okay, so what if it's your independent variable?
Then it will drop everything.
For just that wave? or
Just for
the
that
other
wave.
3 waves?
Yes, if it's
So
your
then I
independent.
lose my dependent variable, even though I have information on it.
Yes.
your,
You'll lose the
your
whole-
line will be okay, is what you're saying. If you have like 5 waves, and
Your
you're
line
missing,
will be okay as long as you can assume that that missingness is missing at random.
but what we were trying to figure out is like if you have a data set, and you may, this is not really a conceptual theoretical question, this is more a pragmatic question.
I like those.
Okay, so if you have a data set where you have 5 years on somebody, and in year 3, they didn't answer something, or there's something missing from one independent variable, you lose all of wave 3 unless you do some kind of multiple imputation or something ahead of time. Like, so if it's a observation specific variable. Because
You lose
list-wise,
all the way through.
But only for that case.
for any case that's missing on any item, it does list-wise unless you do some kind of treatment for it.
Yes, for any case, yes, but you only lose, only lose it for that case, for that year.
Because I think one of the things that's confusing in multi-level is, like with the HLM software, it kind of sells that you don't lose information if you don't have every observation on every person. That you can, you're supposed to have 5, but what people assume is that it doesn't matter if you have any missing data, and it's not really the same thing. You're
No,
not
it's
talking
not.
about,
It's
so
not.
that gets confusing for people.
Yes, and it was confusing for me too. It was
Yeah.
very confusing. You're going to lose information. If you have just an item missing, you are going to lose information for that person for that way.
Unless
All
you treat it.
information, unless it's on the dependent variable. If it's on the dependent variable, you're fine. If it's on an independent variable, you're going to lose information.
That's confusing. Why is it okay to have a different variable? Because of the MR?
Because of maximum likelihood estimation.
Okay.
Yes. And you come over to the lab later with us, and I'll show you how to fix that. You can have, and you can, we'll get there. I'll get there in this lecture. So it's fixable. At least in M+, it's fixable. I haven't seen any of the other software. Maybe in MLM it's also fixable. But with direct estimation. But I'm not there yet. I'm doing the imputation stuff first, and that's the next slide. So, anything else? Okay, so multiple imputation for multi-level models. Here's what I found that's supposed to do, all the software I found that's supposed to do multi-level multiple imputation. One is PAM, which is written by Schaefer. It's a Bayesian algorithm. It's an S+ module that's been ported to R since. And it's a wonderful little program. It took me about 1.5 years to figure out how to get to run. Literally. Like, it was sort of, I wasn't working on it 8 hours a day for 1.5 years, I can admit that. But when I first tried it, then it wasn't working, and then I tried it again, and it wasn't working, and I tried it again, it wasn't working, and then, every 2 months I kind of picked it up and tried to figure it out. And I eventually figured it out, and I am going to show you how it works, so you don't have to do this. So, man, I was very excited about PAN to use for my dissertation. It didn't run. It never converged, which was sort of a, oh my God, I'm not going to graduate kind of feeling. I'm supposed to graduate in 3 months and it's not running. So that sucks. That feeling. I hope you've never encountered that. Okay. MLVim has Schaefer's PAN implemented, and supposedly it actually works better. I haven't used it yet, though I know I'm going to sooner or later. Supposedly it works better because the 2 things you've got to give a Bayesian model is starting values and a prior distribution. Now the prior distribution is diffuse in these models, so it change, but the starting values, and supposedly ML has a good way of calculating starting values, and I don't even know if you can give starting values to pen. I don't think you can. I think you just randomly base them. WinMice is this program for chain equations, and I have to admit, when I came to this workshop, I wasn't 100% prepared for this talk yet. The other ones were done, but this one wasn't. So I was kind of freaking out that all weekend I'm going to have to simulate our data sets for the practical. And Julie actually told me that, hey, you gave a practical for my multi-level class once, so you can just use that data set. It was wonderful. I was done in 2 minutes. I just had to find the folder, and it was done. And I had a folder. So I was sitting at home. I had like another 2 hours that I kind of allocated for doing this. And I figured, well, that's great. I'm just going to pull up this WinMice thing that I've never used, and I'm going to try to use it. It's a wonderful little program. It does chain equations. The way it works is you pull up your data set, and it's pretty straightforward. Then for each variable that has missing data, you have to set up a whole multi-level model with your other variables. You have to start a whole multi-level model that it's going to use for the imputations, and there's no backup. So if you screw up, you start over. So I had in this data set there's like 8 variables that had missing data, and the 6th one I screwed up and I had to start all over. So I did that twice, and when it was all done, I hit OK and I hit impute, and it says too much missing data on one of the variables. These were the exact words. Not on, they didn't tell me which one. It's just on one of the variables. There's too much missing data. And then it gave me an error message and crashed. So it doesn't really work yet. And I don't think it's developed because the data on it is 2005, so I think kind of the person who wrote it abandoned it. But it supposedly does multi-level imputations. But I can tell you that the highest rate of missing data I had was 12%, so I don't know what it was complaining about. So I figured, I'm going to do a practical on it, but I quickly talked myself out of it. And that was my 2 hours with WinMice. And then there's Amelia, which we saw the other day. They kind of sell this as we can do longitudinal one multi-level multiple imputation, but it's not true. It's a lie. It took me a while to figure that out. It really cannot do multi-level imputations. It can do some kind of a pseudo multi-level imputation, so I'm going to explain how that works. And while I used it for my dissertation, I would not recommend it to anybody to use because it's not really a multi-level imputation model. Under some conditions, it might work, but we'll get into that in detail. They're marketing it as this is great for longitudinal multi-level local even. And there's some new stuff coming out. UCell was actually a co-author on PAN, Schiffer's co-author on PAN, has put up a presentation on his website on this program, a mysterious program called Shrimp about a year ago. And I've been waiting for that program to come out ever since, and it hasn't. But it sounds great because he claims it does everything. It works wonderfully. It does all sorts of distributions. It's great and it's wonderful, and no one's ever seen the program. I actually have a question to him about PAN, so I might email him one of these days, and he's responsive. He was the one who actually told me when I was in my PAN crisis that, maybe you should fix something else, but that's never been enough for you. So he's pretty nice. Okay, now, imputation model on level 1 is really, really conceptually difficult, and I'm hoping we're going to spend some time on this stuff, because I am still struggling with a lot of these concepts myself, because there's no clear prescriptions, and there's a lot of decisions you have to make it right. Okay, so the conventional wisdom is that your missing data model should be the same as your analytical model, plus auxiliary variables that can inform the missingness. Now everything's imputed on an unstructured model base, so everything is related to everything else. And so let's extend this to the multi-level framework. Now, what happens then? So you have random effects now. And So let's say you have an estimation model. You know that your slopes kind of look like this. I'm not even going to go into the more complex case. If you impute, ignoring that there's variance in your slopes, and you're basically going to impute with this slope and with some variance over here. So you're ignoring this information. You're either decreasing your variance or you're increasing it for you're biasing these slopes, at least on your imputation values. You're biasing these slopes to go towards the center. So you want to allow for that variation in your imputation model. This is why you need to use the special imputation model that takes this into account. Now, once we start talking about these slopes, then it gets even messier. Because if you just fit one slope through here, it's going to be somewhere over here. I should use a different color maybe. It's going to be somewhere over here. So for this case, where your slope is going the opposite direction, you're still going to be imputing these values. So that is going to bias your slope in various directions. So you need to include the random effects in your imputation model. Otherwise, you're going to be faced with this kind of bias.
That was my question yesterday.
That was your question?
Yeah, I was
Oh,
like,
it
how
took
do
me
you
forever.
include individuals when their slopes go all over the
Yeah.
place?
You can't. I mean, if you just use, ice or you just use one of those, Norm or Amelia,
Yeah.
it doesn't really do that right. So you have to take that into account. Now, I spent pretty much a week thinking about what kind of bias this can introduce, but this is the best way I can describe it conceptually. I don't know if this is 100% correct or not, but this is what I think it is, and this makes sense to me. Though I'm happy to be challenged on this if you want to start a discussion on this and why this is. Now, another difficult issue is centering. Like, if you're one of Julia's students or work with Julia or you work with HLM, which kind of a click of a button, you can center your variables. You might actually center your variables. Now, that could make a difference. But we're getting into territory that, well, I was able to think this through in a week, so I can present it over here. I don't know what happens if you don't center on the imputation model and center on the analysis model. I'm not 100% sure what that'll do. Now, if you're like me, I do tricks like group mean center on level 1, and I include the group means as a level 2 variable. Now that gets even more messed up. So what do you do then? How would you impute? How would you analyze? I think you have to use that imputation model for the two analysis models, which is probably not what you want to hear if you're moving these kind of models and you want to compare them or something like that. You seem frustrated.
No, it's tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are the most difficult issues with multi-level modeling
What is it?
or multi-level design data. Go ahead.
Can you base your imputation model on the information you already have for their trajectory?
So, can you base the information you have on what trajectory?
Well, so if they have a depressed mood trajectory and they have 3 out of 4 time points,
Mm-hmm.
can you do an imputation based on those other 3 time points?
Well, these multiple imputation methods actually use that information, yes. So I mean, they work like any other multiple imputation method that we've gone through on the last 2 days. That they take the expected value based on all available information, and they take the expected distribution, and they randomly draw from that distribution. And when you randomly draw from that distribution, let's say about 10 times and create 10 separate data sets, they actually recommend 10 for multi-level models, not 5. I've seen a lot of people use 5. They actually recommend 10, and I personally would argue that maybe that's not enough. So when you impute 10 times, you impute based on all that information. Though, I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure that the random effects are appropriately taken into account when you're running PAN on all the variables that has missing data on.
When you say the random effects, this is going to probably sound really naive, but
Yes.
so is there a way to tell the imputation software, like, all of this data is within this person?
Yeah, you can tell the software that here's my nesting,
The clustering.
here's my clustering. You actually,
So does that take
this
care
for
of
a
the
2-level model. I mean, getting 3-level models, I don't, ML supposedly does it. Yeah, and 4, in fact, 4. You can do 4-level ML, supposedly.
But so so if you do that, then the nesting, isn't that sort of like the random?
Yeah, that is the random effect.
Okay, so,
But I am not 100, this is my question to you, Sal, I'm not 100% sure that it's appropriately modeled for the variables that have missing data on. I know it's appropriately modeled for independent variables,
okay.
but I'm not sure that it's appropriately modeled when you're looking at the relationship between two variables that has missing data. So if you're imputing based on a model that everything's related to everything else, it's an unstructured model.
Okay.
So let's say you have two variables that have missing data. Will the random effect be modeled when you're modeling this relationship in the imputation? I'm not 100% sure. It's not in any of the literature. I mean, there's one article written on PAN, so and I see it's not in any of the literature written on PAN, there's one article. So it's not in that one article. So, and I can give you that article too, it's actually a cool check.
So the coefficient for the random effects, you don't know if that's,
Yes, I don't know if it's appropriately taken into account. I am sure that it's appropriately taken into account when we're modeling the relationship between a variable that has no missing data, this one has no missing, and one of the variables that has missing data, which is kind of a dependent variable in the imputation model. That's one of those things that sooner or later I'll figure it out. I think it's taken into account. I think I asked Schaefer, I wasn't 100% sure he was understanding what I'm asking. He said yes, but I want to check with somebody else. Yeah, but supposedly it's all there. Supposedly it's modeled appropriately, so I'm just going to trust that they do something stupid when they look at that software, because it's sort of an important little thing. It should be pointed out. So, you want me to complicate this any further? Because I can. I need a new sheet of paper to do that. So, then you have so when you have a missing data model, or when you have a multi-level model, let's say y is equal to beta 0 plus beta 1x1 plus beta 2x2 plus error, and then your beta 0 is equal to gamma 0, 0 plus, I mean, if you prefer the single equation notation, then this will make more sense to you than if all for people who prefer the multiple equation stuff. So the 0, 1, let's say C1 plus R0, and then beta 1, gamma 1, 0 plus gamma 1, 1, D1 plus R. So if you rewrite this into the single equation form, which I'm not going to do, what you're going to see is you have these variables plus V1. And then you have an interaction between Z1 and X1. So this independent variable that influences the slope of beta 1 is actually an interaction between Z1 and X1. Now the way you model that in the imputation model is by putting in the interaction. you actually have to produce that interaction by hand and put it in the imputation model. Which is basically, take your Z1 values, multiply by X1 values, put it in the imputation model. Now, one of the things I didn't talk about, maybe I should have, on Thursday, is how do you put interactions in the multi-level model. Julia sent me a wonderful slideshow that actually talked about that. I was thinking, like, that's actually important. Maybe I should have said something about that. So I'm going to say it now. If you're here, you're probably somebody who at least sees interactions once in a while. So, when you have even just a single level model, how do you put in an interaction? Well, it's very simple. You create an interaction by multiplying x1 by, say, z1 in this situation. Now, you're going to have some missing data on x1. You're going to have some missing data on z1. You're going to have missing data on all the interaction terms. So you have x1, z1, and then you have x1 times z1. So let's say you have, observed, here's a missing, here's a missing, see both of these are missing, here's a missing. So what's going to happen is you're going to have missing data over here, you're going to have missing data over here, you're going to have missing data over here. When you create that interaction. Then you plug this into Amelia or any of the other software. You create the imputation, and you're going to have all these missing data. Now, when you create imputations based on this, you're going to have something plugged in here, you're going to have something plugged in here, you're going to have something plugged in here, something plugged in here. And you're going to have difference values plugged in here, here, and here. So that won't look like an interaction anymore. Because if you multiply what's plugged into here and this value, you won't get this value. That is fine. You're still going to get unbiased estimates. Might look ugly, might look weird, it's fine. That is how you do it appropriately. You don't go back and then delete, you don't compute first and then create the interactions. You don't go back and change that these values look right. This is how you do it. This is the best approach. And yeah, so over here, when you're creating imputations based on this model, if you want to use a random slope in the imputation model, you're going to have to include, or you're going to do a predictor of random slope, you're going to have to include that interaction. And you'll be faced with this situation. The way you do it is you have the two variables, you create the interaction before the imputation, impute everything, and leave it alone. The values you impute are completely meaningless from all contexts and aspects of everything. They just produce unbiased estimates in the multivariate analysis. Go ahead.
So basically, you are saying that you should not impute and then later from the imputed creating an interaction. And I'm just wondering, why don't you do, for example, you have 5 different data sets with different values of imputed?
Yeah.
It's a bad question. Why don't you multiply those imputed so the randomly selected basically? And you have, but they will be related, right? And in each of 5 data sets, this interaction will be directly related and will be a real interaction, but you will have 5 different ones. I'm just wondering why is this
Because I'll tell you what I think. But that's the best I can offer. I'll tell you what I think. I think it still decreases the uncertainty on the interaction. It still decreases the uncertainty, therefore it's going to be the coefficient of the interaction, or the standard of the interaction narrower, so your results will be, your coefficients will be overconfident. The reason I think that is an interaction is actually a linear transformation because you're multiplying. That's a transformation. Now, you are taking something certain, you're taking certainty and uncertainty, and you're multiplying it together. And in reality, you shouldn't be taking something, the certainty, and multiplying it with the uncertainty, because the interaction value is actually uncertain, also completely uncertain. So when you're interacting certainty with uncertainty, you're including some kind of certainty in the model. So the way to be the most conservative on these estimates is to model the uncertainty completely.
I have another question. So if you model x1 multiplied by z1, you don't use x1 imputed already. You use
No.
all of
No.
these. Okay.
No, you wouldn't use the imputed x1. You would create the interaction before imputation. And then impute all three variables. And that goes for both multi-level, and that goes for regular also.
I'm having a hard time picturing, like in an HLM context, when you put in the Z1, let's say you had the same data on Z1 and X1,
I mean, if you have missing data on Z1, you're really in trouble, because you have
Right.
level 2 missing.
so it's kind of weird, though, you know what I'm saying? But like if you create the Z1 times X1, there's no place to put that in HLM.
Up here. I mean, in HLM, there's no place to put that in. But in a multi-level model, if you rethink and rewrite this equation, that's
It's a base
basically
model,
what
right?
it is. It's putting over here. If
And
you write it
level-
up as a single equation, this coefficient over here will be included into the one-level model as an interaction between these two variables.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just thinking sort of practically. You
Well-
basically can't use HLM because you can't put it in the variable. I mean, it has no place. Like, it's just because you're, well.
Yes, okay. What you can do is discard it. This might sound weird, but you can actually discard that variable. But when you imputed, that variable was included for creating all other
Yeah.
fixed effects. And then when you then you can discard it completely when you're putting it into analysis in HLM. And you would actually do that with all software. That's a good question. I didn't think about that, but that's what you have to do. So it's included only for the modeling of all the other missing data. Did I lose half of the group? I hope not. Questions?
I just want to go back to the centering. This is,
Oh yeah, that's the one I haven't even thought about. So we can talk about that as much as we can. I have no idea.
I'm trying to think of why it would be a problem if you don't center when you're doing your imputation model, and then you're doing your analysis model, and you decide to center. Since it's a constant, because you don't know when you're doing the imputation if you're going to group or randomly center, if you're going to go to some other kind of funky, like,
Exactly.
you know, wave 1 or wave 5 or whatever. So if you don't make that decision, you just walk through.
That's okay.
In the imputation model, I'm trying to think of why that would be a problem. I can't get my brain around why that would be a problem. In the analysis model, if you then do center, is that exactly like an interaction with another linear term? Because it's not multiplication, it's subtraction or it's subtraction.
Yes.
And so it seems like there it's a constant that you're subtracting, so it wouldn't be as big a deal.
Well,
But I guess it's how you grade the mean.
I'll tell you 2 I'm trying to think about this.
Okay.
One is, there's kind of a rule of thumb that your imputation model always has to be the same as your analysis model. That's the rule of thumb, so that to me that means the centering needs to be the same. Though I have no idea why, it's just because
But you know,
it's just
practically,
about the
they
same.
you know, they argue that centering is mathematically equivalent to not.
What is it? I mean, and
Right.
then you get these situations, and to follow up the other line of thinking, is when you get these situations when you have 2 slopes, and you have 2 slopes, you have this slope and you have this slope. these intersects might not be significantly different. If you have your zeros over here, if you move your zeros over here, they'll be very different. So if your center, let's say you didn't center, and your zero was over here, if you center, your zero is going to be over here. There's a big difference. I mean, then, the difference in your intercepts, we're not even talking about the slopes, the difference in your intercept will change tremendously. So I don't know if that actually introduces, or what kind of bias would introduce if you ignore the center. But your results will differ.
Julia, were you talking about whether or not you impute before or after you center?
If you have to, when you're doing your imputation model, you have to do the same kind of centering. You have to create the centered variables
And then impute?
and then impute, and then use, like, I guess you could have either 3 group versions of all your variables, uncentered, randomly centered, and grouply centered in the imputation model. And then you could pick which one you need in your analysis model.
Because what I was wondering is, once you impute, to the extent that those values actually are then in the data set, even though they're not supposed to happen, think of it that way, wouldn't they then affect how you send it? Do you see what I'm saying? They've been generated, and if they're included in your mean.
They would influence your means that you use for the centering in the model.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
That's tricky, yeah.
So in that case, it would seem better to center first, to change the ones that are there first, because then.
But then under the same variable, that's what I'm trying.
I'm thinking it's better to center before the imputation.
Or however you want to set up.
But yeah, you're right. So then use the centered variables, don't use the software center. Because you're
Yes.
not- Yes.
Yes, and then you would actually have to do no transplantation once you've created your imputations. Because you have to do your transformation, your centering before anything happens. So that little feature of HLM that you click that center this way or center that way, that goes away. That stuff don't help anymore.
Nobody's written about that.
Not that I know.
Centering.
Of. Not that I've seen. I mean,
Because that's also an issue for non-multi-level, because they say to use the interactions as part of your imputation model. And a lot of people like West, and they usually go to West say to center before you do interactions in non-multi-level. So you still have to make that decision.
yeah, oh yeah, and then,
That's
yeah,
just-
exactly. Center before or after you do the interactions and how you deal with that in the imputation model. I guess what I would say is you're safe doing, if you're doing the same thing on your imputation model that you would be doing on your analysis model, you're probably safe. But these are difficult issues. And these are open questions in the field. So if you want to run simulations on this and just write papers on this, I'm sure you can get published.
We want you to do it, so we can cite you.
One of these days, it's just so tedious, I hate simulations. I'm running a bunch of them anyway. So. Anything else you want to throw out? Okay, well let me talk about Bayesian convergence just a little bit, because since I was showing off Amelia, I didn't explain how to evaluate Bayesian convergence. But it's sort of an important thing. If you're ever going to use PAN or ML, then it's important to know when your imputation model is converged. And Bayesian convergence is sort of it's still debated, what testing is, what hasn't. So it's using the Markov chain Monte Carlo algorithm, and it's sort of a random walk. That algorithm is an iterative algorithm that creates this random walk in the distribution. It kind of walks around in the distribution. And you have to run that a long time, and then you have to randomly pick out from that sequence that you ran. You have to randomly pick out values. So that's conceptually what is going on and how you're modeling. Now, unfortunately, when you're looking at back-to-back iterations, there is an autoregressive problem, because they somewhat depend on each other. So you have to sample that process sufficiently far away from the other sample points to make sure that you get independent observation of the distribution, and you're modeling from that distribution. So yeah, and you have to make sure that chain, that Markov chain, has actually converged. So the way you do that is you use the ocular shock test, to quote my Professor Kevin Smith. You look at it, and if it looks right, then you can assume it converged. At least that's how I've done it with PAN. I'm sure there are better ways of evaluating convergence. I know there are better ways of evaluating convergence, and if you're a Bayesian person, you probably know these things. I'm not a Bayesian person yet. Hopefully soon I will be. So, unfortunately, the bad news, that really, really sucks, is for each parameter is estimated. So for all of these, each one of them, you have to check convergence individually. So you have to look at a lot of these chains, and they look ugly, to be able to assess what has converged. Now, one of the two things you want to look at is the parameter value plot, which looks at this random walk. Basically, just plots out where you are in the distribution, and the autocorrelation function plot. And you also have to be careful about the range of assessment, because if you plot that out for, let's say, 1,000 iterations versus 10,000 iterations, can look very different. So and once again, it just takes some getting used to be able to see if does this look right or does this not look right. And I was very comfortable for a long time making that judgment call, and now I'm getting more and more comfortable as I read. I really encourage you, if you're going to do this, encourage you to go and read up on it, because I can give you some examples that I had access to early on, which actually comes from the norm help file in Windows, but that's usually not enough. Now, if you're lucky, the program will actually provide the worst linear function for you, and that just shows you your worst function. So this one is the one that looks the worst, so you only have to evaluate that. Because if that looks like it converges, you're good on the other ones. Unfortunately, PAN does not do that for you, so you have to look at all of them. So what is this Markov chain looking like? This is what it looks like. When you run this Markov chain, let's say for 1,000 iterations, and this is actually one that converges very quickly, and it looks good, more or less. So if you take these values, like these are values like plotted right next to each other, you take these values and you plot them out, you get a nice normal distribution. And that's what you're sampling for. Maybe it's a little bit skewed, you might even get that. So Bayesian is kind of robust to some distributional violations. Not, if it's extreme, it's not robust to that, but some distributional violations actually are more robust than maximum likelihood and direct estimation. And so you just run it for 1,000 runs, and then you take the second half of it, and you randomly draw, let's say this one, and then you draw one at 600, and then you draw one at 700, etc. You make sure that they're far away from each other, sufficiently far away from each other that they're independent of each other, because as you see that there's some dependence between draws. Like this draw and this draw, you see that there's a trend of going down, and then it stays down and it starts going up. So there's some autocorrelation there. And then you can see the autocorrelation plot. You see that it dies down very quickly after a couple of iterations, and then it stays in this range, and that's great. That's what you want to see. This is the converged model. Now this is a slowly converging model. When you see the autocorrelation goes down very slowly, and then it kind of dips and it goes faster. And if you run this out for 10,000 iterations, it'll probably be fine. You see the autocorrelation better. So you know, if you sample from here, if you sample from here, they depend on each other. And then you have a kind of a run up. You kind of see that there's some trends in here that are much more visible than in the previous plot. Now this thing will still converge if you run it out long enough. Now this is one that looks ugly. This will not converge probably. There's either something underidentified or this model will actually not run in the long run. It's kind of dipping slowly. You see that it's slowly getting trend, and that's not good. You want to have your function as something very steady that you're going to sample from. So this is kind of the example that we have this in trouble, and something's not working right. This is the kind of stuff I had in my dissertation, just wasn't looking right. So I was just too afraid to use it. And a lot of the parameters were great, and that's a couple of them just look like this, and it's not good. This is one that really has not converged yet, but it will. So you see that the function hasn't settled really. It still runs around. You see a run up over here, a run down. In the autocorrelation function, you see some bits and heights. But this function will actually converge. It'll be all right. So it's fine. If I go back to, if you want to look at the differences between this is a slowly converging function. In this situation, the best thing you can do is to let it run out long and sample like every 1,000th iteration. So when you're sampling from these distributions, you're actually sampling from very far away, so you have no autocorrelation left. Questions on this? Go ahead.
How does it, sorry, I talk so much.
Go ahead,
I'm
go
just
ahead.
trying to really figure this out. So how does this, how does this relate to the same, so this is Bayesian underlying
Yeah, this is the Bayesian underlying function.
for the multi-level model coefficients?
No, well, yeah, either for the multi-level model coefficients, but for the multi-level model imputation.
So this is for the imputation.
Because you're drawing from this distribution. You can't be. I mean, if you're running your model fully Bayesian, so not restricted maximum likelihood or full information maximum likelihood in your multi-level. I mean, I know that there's empirical Bayes included in the multi-level estimation, but that is only to estimate a couple of the parameters. You can estimate the multi-level model with full Bayesian, which is not something I know how to do, but I know it can be done. And then this would actually give you your estimates. What you would do is you would average across this function.
Is this from Amelia or from?
This is from Norm.
Norm.
Amelia doesn't use Bayesian.
Okay, so Norm's trying to figure out the right imputations.
Well, that's the thing, that Norm doesn't try to figure out anything. You have to make all these convergence judgment calls yourself. You have to tell it that let's run this for 10,000 iterations, and then let's sample every 500 iteration. Let's sample the imputation every 500 iteration. It's not as nice as the software we're used to, which N+, which just kind of iterates and then it says I'm done, and great, you get the results. You actually have to make all these judgment calls yourself.
So the first one you trust because it was consistent. And this one, since it's more all of, you're not sure you're getting the right information.
Yes. I'm not sure my function has actually converged into
A
that.
stable.
The way Bayesian works is you have to give it something called a burn-in. You let it iterate for a while. That is the time when you get from your starting values to the top of your distribution. And then it walks around on that distribution from iteration to iteration. And then you sample from that walk. And you sample from those, and then you can average those out to get your parameter estimates and actually your standard errors. This is how standard errors are calculated. So if you were ever wondering how you get the random effects basically in your multi-level model, this is the empirical Bayes algorithm. But you can actually calculate the whole thing fully and then get empirical confidence interval and standard errors and then make assumptions supposedly. Then your priors are always going to be something that, if you get a reviewer that doesn't like Bayesian, they'll kill you because you use priors or because you use Bayesian and the story. And your priors can influence your outcome. So where you start from can influence where you get. Okay, any other questions before I get into how to cheat? Or how Amelia does it at least. So you can make a pseudo multi-level model from a single level model. Think about it. Let's say you have a baseline that has a variance. That variance is distributed normally. That's the assumption you make. So it's going to be somewhere around here across your units. There's a distributional assumption that it is normally distributed. And that's pretty much the assumptions you make. Now, how would you get this in a single level regression equation? Well, it's very simple. You just draw up your y equal beta 0 plus beta 1 x1 plus, and you put a dummy variable for each of your clusters but one. But that will actually tell you how your intercept changes from a baseline which you select. You cannot put all the clusters, so you say, I'm going to continue here, beta 2, cluster 1, beta 2, cluster 2, beta 3, cluster 2, plus beta 4, cluster 3, etc., all the way to the last cluster. That actually gives you how these slopes vary across your clusters. You're kind of making a pseudo multi-level model. In fact, there's a function in Stata that does this. You know what it is, Julia? What's the one that averages across your number of dummies?
XT.
Yeah, it's XD, right?
Right, but then it's fixed effects.
Yeah, XD, right, fixed effects. So if you're only, yeah, that's what it is.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is a fairly known method, not from full-time series analysis. So you can actually do this instead of running a multi-level model. The problem is that including all these independent variables for each of your clusters kind of eats up your degrees of freedom. So this is a less powerful method. It does have the advantage that you don't have to assume that the differences between these slopes are normally distributed. Now, if you want to include these slopes also, if there's variance in the slopes also, then it gets really ugly, because then what you have to do is create an interaction between cluster 1 and x1, cluster 2 and x1, cluster 3 and x1. So you create all those interactions. That will give you random slopes also. But once again, very quickly you run out of degrees of freedom when you're running that analysis. So therefore, in multi-level people say, let's just make the assumption that your slopes are normally distributed, your intercepts are normally distributed, and you're fine. You're better off. So if you make that assumption, you can run a multi-level model and grade. Now, you can do this in the imputation model also, and that is what Amelia does. In the practical, we didn't talk about it, but there's a little button that asks you what the clustering is. If you give it a clustering variable, it will create dummies for all those clusters and include them. And that might actually be okay if all you want to estimate is random effects of your intercepts. If you don't want to estimate random effects of your slopes in your multi-level model, you're perfectly fine doing just that using Amelia or any other multiple imputations, including all these dummies. And it's fine. You get into trouble once you estimate the slopes plus the intercepts, etc., etc. Amelia claims it can do it for time. So Amelia, they kind of market it as longitudinal something. So if all you have, if this variable, this x1 is time, and maybe time squared, and you have another variable for time squared, and you have another variable for time cubed, then they'll create all those interactions between time and your dummies and include that in the model. My experience with that is that once you start including those, it just won't run. At least with my data so far, it just crashed. It either said, you don't have enough information to estimate this, or it iterated forever and never emerged. So Amelia can actually do it. And if you do this, you get unbiased results, because you're even making less assumptions than you are making with the multi-level model, with the random effects model. You're making less assumptions. You're not assuming normally distributed slopes and normally distributed intercepts. So you can still get unbiased results using the non-multi-level package. The problem is if you get complex data, you want to do other than slopes of time, then you have to venture into the multi-level software. And once again, 10 is really a pain in the ass. It took me a year and a half to figure figure out. Convergence assessment is a pain. I'm not even sure it works 100% right. ML is expensive, and Minimize apparently doesn't like me. But 2 nights ago when I tried to use it, so your options are very, very good. Okay, any questions? Should we take a break? Yeah, let's take a break, and then I'll go on. A couple more slides. And then we can go over it. I'm going to talk about level 2 missing. It's also a horrible beast. And you don't want to have level 2 missing. That's one of those other things that you don't want.
But let me just remind you, level 2 is if I have a person, maybe the level 2 is someone looking at activation over time. The level 2 would be the activation over time, the first one. Yeah, so it's something that's stable level first.
Or if you have a comparative political study and you're looking at people's attitudes towards their government in separate countries, then it would be country level characteristics like the GDP of the country. I mean, it depends on what your nesting is. So level 2 missing. Yeah, level 2 missing, that's a bad situation. Now, I specifically asked Joe Schaefer in a conversation what to do in these situations. And he had some recommendations that I have no citations for, but he said it. I didn't follow them in my dissertation, and I'll even tell you why. So he said that the best thing to do in this situation is to collapse your your 2-level data set into a 1-level data set by averaging across your level 2 clusters. If you can average across your level 2 clusters, then you'll have a level 1 data set. So if it was over time data, then you have a person level data set. If it was country data from multiple countries, then you have a country level data set. What you need to do is take, he said, take this package norm, so you can use other packages, take any of the multiple imputation packages, like Amelia, and impute 10 times. I'd say more, but he said impute 10 times on that level 2 data set, on that single level 2 data set. Now once that is done, go back and load all the information. Load all the information into one of these, he said N, which is his 1-level data set, or his multi-level imputation data set. Load all that information into PAN and produce imputations based on, scrap all the data you don't want to use, scrap all the data that you actually have information on level 1, and then use those variables to produce a 2-level imputation. And only impute, for each of those 10 data sets, impute once with PAN. So you have 10 data sets in the end. So normally you would just take the multi-level imputation package, you would impute 10 times. Now he says collapse that data set into a single level. So if everything's on level 2, on your level 2, impute 10 times in the regular single level imputation data set, and then take those 10 imputations, remerge them with the multi-level data set, and then impute once for each one of those. Then you have 10 multi-level data sets. Following? No, it's kind of weird. So, kind of weird and very tedious. So, what's wrong with this approach? I thought about it long and hard. What's wrong with this approach? Most of the time, nothing. Most of the time, this approach is fine. But when you're modeling, let's say, growth curves, or you're modeling changes, and you expect that your value will determine if you're observed or not. And you might have some auxiliary variables to predict that, but your value actually determines where you'll be standing. And it's a problem. Let's say one person has a growth curve on a trait that looks like this. But you don't observe this. This is time, you'll be imputing based on that upward bias average. So if you expect that this is the kind of situation you're facing, I don't think this is a good idea. And this is why I ended up not using it in my dissertation. Because I expected that some of those countries that I couldn't collect data on were very bad off at that situation. They were better off when they actually started reporting. So I expected that there's a difference, there's a discrepancy, which I actually was able to capture with some of my data, but not everything. So if you average across available information to produce these level 2 imputations, beware that if you expect bias in your observed information, it's not a good way to do it. Otherwise, it's probably not a bad idea. It's probably a good approach, but you got to think about when this is appropriate and when this is not appropriate. I kind of thought about maybe if we could iterate it across, so we could do this and then we could delete all the information again and do it again, delete all the information again and do it again, and see if it converges to the same point, kind of like the chain equation imputation approach. Maybe you can actually produce an unbiased result, even in these situations, but that is for somebody else to determine, because I'm not going to program that into a computer. So, any questions? Okay, so multiple imputation in software. How is it implemented? Well, it's implemented wonderfully in HL and N+. If you have multiple imputed data sets, these two software are great because you can actually give it the multiple data sets and automatically do everything for you. Everything but calculate the rate of missing information. Now, if you don't have the rate of missing information, you're going to have a hard time deciding if those 10 imputations were enough. This is something we went through in the practical. I am not sure if STAT will actually do this, or it will do this for a lot of models, automatic combination. I'm not sure if it will do it for multi-level models. I don't use STAT. R might actually do it with Zelig, though I mean the multi-level package I use in R is called LME4 and LME, and I haven't found anything that will combine multiple imputations for those two packages. Zelig might be able to run multiple imputation, or not just multiple imputation, but it might actually be able to run multi-level models. I haven't tried yet. Zelig is also written by Gary King, who wrote Amelia, so I used it before, but not for multi-level. And then MLVin actually has multiple imputation built in. They actually have a whole Bayesian estimator built in, and you can draw imputations using that. So even if you impute it with another program, you might be able to get MLVin to combine. Maybe not, maybe. It might require some hacking. So I think that whole Bayesian thing requires a lot of hacking in MLVin. I don't think it's used at all or well tested or anything like that. Okay, now Rubin's rules. Talked about this. These are the rules how the multiply imputed data set analyses are combined into final analysis. This is what Norm did in the practical on Friday. And it's still easy. It's very easy to do still. And Norm will still do it for you, even if you've ran a multi-level analysis. Norm will still combine your results. It's not limited to just regressions or anything else. It'll do it for you. The one point of confusion is the random effects. What do you do with the random effects? Because you actually get random effects and their standard errors with a multi-level model. How do you combine those? You combine them the exact same way. You put in the random effects, you put in its standard errors, and they're just considered parameter estimates and standard errors for all intents and purposes. So you just, in that long list that you put in that text file, just put in the random effects. And don't forget about the error covariances. You probably want to include those. And you might have to dig around for a while in your statistics package to figure out how to get those out of the package. Because if I remember, HLM gives you the random effects, and I'm not sure if it gives you the standard errors for it. Does it? tau matrix.
The bottom, I think if I'm understanding the correct thing, the standard errors of the variance components,
Yes.
it's part of the variance components main table.
And it actually gives you the variance component and the standard error of the variance component. And what about the covariance
Well,
components?
the concept of standard deviation, but like if it's standard deviation, you might have to turn it into a standard error.
That's the thing, that it only gives you the standard deviation of your fixed effect. It gives you how,
But though it gives the random effects, it gives the variance components and
gives you the variance components and the standard deviation. That might be good enough.
I'll show you some.
What about the covariance? It's been a while since I've done this page around. But what about the covariance components?
It gives you the covariance to ask for it. It'll give you the covariance
Exactly.
it'll give you the covariance and the correlations of the
The
error.
correlations of them, yes. And it actually gives you the standard errors of those two. Some
I
of
think
them.
you have to ask for it.
You have to ask for it. Yes, as I said, you have to dig around in your software to be able to get all this information out of there. But if you want to combine those, you can. They're still parameter estimates and standard errors of parameter estimates. They're just not coefficients. Your variance components or whatever your software calls it. Okay, well that's all I had on multiple imputation, multi-level models. Any questions? Okay. Now, here's the good news. Now you can actually directly estimate multi-level models. It's unfortunate, it's very computationally intensive. Very computationally intensive. But as long as you have your existing data on level 1, it seems okay. The rules are pretty much the same as it is in structural equation models. You need to take your independent variables and turn them into dependent variables. And for that, you require a multi-level structural equation modeling package. I know of only one, and that is M+. But M+ will actually do it for you. I know that MLWin people, I don't use MLWin, I tried once maybe, but I don't use MLWin, but I know that the MLWin people are talking about factors in their multi-level models. I don't know where that research is going or where it's coming from or where it's going, but if those factors can be used as independent variables, then you might be able to specify so that the independent variables become dependent variables. So you might be able to pull it off in MLWin, but you're going to have to dig in the manual for a while. There's one problem with the auxiliary variables, which I could not include auxiliary variables in these situations yet. Though Craig Anders claims it's possible. Though I don't know how. He hasn't given me the secret. So, okay, so in M+, it's basically the same as a structural equation model. It is a multi-level structural equation model. Kind of the downside of using M+ is you're limited to an unstructured error covariance matrix. So you cannot do AR1 Venn diagonal restrictions on your error covariance matrix. So if you have that situation, then you cannot use this. You cannot use M+. I tried using M+ for my dissertation. That was one of the two problems. The other, that it wasn't converging. So. And also, you can include level 2 using data with M+ now, which is like the first time this ever happened. And it appropriately estimates that it does require Monte Carlo integration, but unfortunately that is not 100% stable. So whenever I see that I have to use Monte Carlo integration in M+, then I'm usually very wary that something's going to go terribly wrong. So one of the things I encourage you to do if you're in this situation is to play around with your starting values a little bit. That's generally a good idea, to play around with your starting values when you have these complex computations. And also to change, the Monte Carlo is a simulation of how many points of that distribution that it's integrating across, how many points it's going to be drawing. You can specify that by default. I think it's 500, but I've tried stable. Though in some situations I've gotten it to work perfectly. Like Julia's data set, I mean, one variable had 12% missing data, one variable had 10% missing data, and the rest only had a couple. With that, it was fine. It ran beautifully. And in fact, the results changed between list-wise and list-wise deletion and controlling for multi-level. And it made sense, if I remember correctly. So now you do have that option. Some practical considerations is basically the following. This is my last slide pretty much. Getting good starting values is a good idea. The best way to get starting values, and this works most of the time, is to run your model with list-wise deletion. Run your model with list-wise deletion, take your output, and go one by one with all your estimates and put them in the starting values. Because that is a very good approximation of what your final results will be, and your chances of your model actually running and converging depend very much on your starting values. Now, unfortunately, the software does not do this automatically. It's one of those things that if this bugs you enough, email him 10, he'll probably include it sooner or later. I sure will one of these days when it bugs me enough. I only use this once, so it doesn't bug me enough yet. And it's very tedious to go back and put in all the starting values, and it's just a pain. So, but it works. It's worth it. It's definitely worth doing. Okay, so that's the good news. Any questions? This was my last slide. That doesn't mean we're done. We're just going to go over to the lab, and I can show you how to do this. Or how to try doing this, all this stuff on your own in practice. Any questions?
Let's do it.
Okay. So, teacher's college, whatever, Mabley 163.
Same place.
Okay, Mabley 163.
You can have a class dinner.
No, we've got it from 3 to 5.